And welcome back to Bless Your Heart. I'm Heather.
And I'm Carlyle. Last week, we talked about healing energy and how faith and the power of the mind can sometimes do what medicine can't. And tonight, we're taking a different spin on it. We're talking about one of the wildest, forgotten chapters in American history, the orphan trains, where hundreds of thousands of kids were sent across the country by rail to start new lives. But to every historian that called this philanthropy, bless your heart. And let's just dive right into it because we both have personal stories that kind of led us to talking about this. So, Heather, why don't you go first with your story?
Yeah, so the other day I was just cleaning out my utility closet, and lo and behold, do I find an old Cabbage Patch Kid. It's all dusty, gross. And it was my husband's cousin, and I was like, "Whoa, I remember that." I used to have one or two, heck, maybe even three back then, and it started making me think about the theory and the conspiracy theory about the Cabbage Patch Kids back in the day, how they were displayed on sale. And it kind of leads into kind of what we wanted to talk about today. So I thought that was perfect.
I know it's like there's always like signs for things that we want to talk about. So, like, my kind of bless your heart moment that segues into this week is the craziest story that my grandmother used to tell. My mom's mom came from Everett, Washington. Her father and his family was all from over here, but he went to work out in the Pacific Northwest with some sort of company, and he died out there. And so the company paid for his widow and her two children, my grandmother and my great uncle, from on the railroad from Everett, Washington to North Carolina. En route, my grandma tells this story that these two wealthy women approached her mother, and offered to buy her. And I always thought that was like very odd. And my grandmother would be just like, ah, honey, it was different times. And I was like, different times that you could just like offer to buy someone? So that year was 1929, which leads us into like how we started looking into this. So like we started looking into the orphan trains, and it is no Hallmark story. It is dark, it is twisted, and like let's jump into it. So the official narrative for the internet, this was an official government program that operated from the years 1854 to 1929. That is a long time.
It is long.
They estimate that 250,000 children were relocated from East Coast cities to Midwest farms. This was run by Children's Aid Society and New York Founding Hospital. It was, like, formed as they were rescuing these street urchins. They said after the Depression, they had all of these street children that were vagrants and that they needed homes, and so they were doing them a solid by collecting all of these children off of the street and sending them to new homes. So you always know if the government says 250,000, it's way more than that,
Way more.
which is, like, crazy. They just took these people's kids, like, they were somebody's child, right?
Saying to me that you could just take somebody's child. But I mean, if you think about it even today, I mean, you could get pulled over, you know? And if for whatever reason, like you have drugs in the car or something like that, or even if it's something even smaller than that, maybe you didn't pay child support or something, like they could take your child. And even back then, they would like take your child for any little thing.
Yeah, I watched this documentary where this kid had some sort of like autoimmune issue that made him bruise a lot, and like it was
Yeah.
documented that he had this autoimmune issue, and they still like reported him and took the kid, and the kid was like getting in worse and worse health, like because he got taken away from his parents, and all of these like unqualified. Most of the people that work in child welfare are well-meaning, but there are some really nefarious, messed up people that take joy in taking people's like children from them instead of trying to like help fix the problem. The world is ugly, the world is dark. Not many people want to be bad parents. The world kind of like forces them into it, and we don't help them.
That does. It does.
Like the first, so like this is a real program. The first train left from New York City to Michigan in the year 1854, which they had like literally the real, like the darker side to the true narrative is they were displaying the kids on platforms and picking them out like livestock. Like, who was the best stock to send to these Midwest farms? Like, many were renamed, their identities erased. There's no follow up. There's testimony of forced labor and abuse. And like, there was no laws about child protection. Like, basically, if they were your child, you could do anything to them back then. So it was like in the name of welfare, but really, it's kind of child trafficking,
And
right?
it wasn't just happening in America, it was happening worldwide, come to find out.
During that same time?
Yeah. When
I
I
don't
was
know
doing
about
the
that.
research, I know, when I was doing the research, I came across where Ukraine, shocker, trafficking, taking children away, Russia, but that, as we know, was like the last Tartarian area or Tartaria.
Yeah. You know what's so crazy is, I just took my nephew to the Biltmore House yesterday, and it reminded me that George Vanderbilt's family built their entire empire off of railroads, right? And then so last night I was doing some research, and Cornelius Vanderbilt's empire really, that's George Vanderbilt's father. Cornelius Vanderbilt, his empire really like boomed, and it coincided with the same years as these orphan trains. So it's like that also is just like the time that the rail lines expanded massively. So we're like people like the Vanderbilts profiting off of these orphan trains.
Were they staying there while they would house them until they would move them to the next place? I mean, there maybe that's
Probably
why there's
is.
so many castles in that area. They were housing all these orphans. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not
and
funny, but you know what I mean.
you know, it's like it could go back to like a repopulation and reset theory. So the
Yeah,
official narrative again is that there were just all of these street kids because of the Great Depression. Well, like even if people lose all of their money, they don't just like abandon their children usually. So they
right.
literally, these kids were just like on the street by themselves and they just like snatched them up and were like, nope, you're no longer this. So that's like the official narrative. But what if it was like we had all of these leftover children because there was a population reset event like a great flood, which
Mhm.
times around the mid 1800s? And like, what a coincidence. 1854, the first orphan train.
Yep,
50s are when the insane asylums started popping up. There were
yep.
10 insane asylums in the country. I guess like official programs, there were 10. And then after 1850, all of a sudden there were 150 insane asylums. What's your take on that?
It's pretty sad. And on top of that, there were also infant asylums. Now, why on earth would you have infant asylums on top of that? But yeah, I mean, it's just like when Haiti has a terrible earthquake, or I don't know, or most likely a hurricane like Jamaica's having right now. And these people would come in, say they're here to help, and they would end up taking the kids with them. It's kind of like they've been doing this for years. It's the same playbook. They did it back then when you had several catastrophes. I mean, you started with 1776 and all of those wars. Then you have mud floods. You've got just flooding in general. You just got natural disasters. And then here we come taking over America, and they're wanting to re-educate everybody. So you take the ones, the parents. So like if I had a kid back then, I would be fighting them constantly, calling them out, saying, "You're lying. We used to have free energy. We used to have all these technology things, and now you're saying we can't have this anymore. I can't access the same buildings I used to." You know, things like that I'm sure happened. They started taking over land. They started doing evil things to leaders of a lot of these indigenous tribes. Even there was a lot of blacks in America. They didn't all come from Africa. There were a lot of blacks here already. And I think that's a whole nother history lesson that we're both learning about. But, you know, they destroy these tribes and make the chief, you know, they basically embarrass him without saying the gruesome things that I have read that they do, but they basically embarrass him in front of their entire people. So I can imagine they're probably setting these places on fire, taking the children, So at the same time, you've got them putting them on trains, putting 12, 13 in this town, 13 in that state, spread them around so that one town, not everybody's like, wait a minute, what's going on? Where all of a sudden these orphans coming from? Well,
And
when
then
you only have
people think that they're doing the right thing and, like, helping these
exactly.
children. I mean, like, I'm sure not everyone who went to the orphanage and was like, "I'm gonna, take in one of these children," had thought that they were gonna, like, go be indentured servants on their farm. I'm sure there were a lot of well-meaning people, but, like, when we were researching all of this, I saw, on a lot of TikToks about the
Hmm.
orphan trains, people had comments, especially from the Midwest, about their grandparents having, no records of where they came from, and then also having, like, memories of being orphans and not knowing where they came from.
Even remember, we had a comment on our TikTok. There was a guy who said his grandmother or somebody in his family in Mexico they offered to buy. So it was
Yeah.
definitely going on worldwide. I mean, they were trying to reset us all at the same time and re-educate us so if you didn't go by their new rules, they were gonna throw you, I think, from what I'm reading, they threw your ass in an insane asylum, and then
Y
your child went on a train or either ended up in one of these asylums, for the children.
It's so crazy too because, like, all of these wealthy philanthropists like George Vanderbilts were so, into these social hygiene programs like eugenics, like, basically, like, cleaning up society, and they all had, like, an idea of, like, what little perfect little people we could be, and then they were using, like, inside these insane asylums, they were doing all sorts of, like, super messed up experiments on people. It was like, what a weird time in history that we just, like, accept and, like, no one questions it, right? And, I do have to make one note because I was wrong. It wasn't Cornelius Vanderbilt, it was his relative, William Henry Vanderbilt, that doubled the family's fortune from 1870 to 1885 through railroads. Their lines that they built were major routes going west. Sounds to
Gotcha.
me like they were into that. He was, like, real George Vanderbilt was really into science, he was really into forestry, which is, like, a school that was disguised and had hidden, like, meaning, so they weren't just moving freight.
No. And I even have proof. So I even read there were some posts on TikTok where from Washington Post, it was written by Andrea Warren, and they were talking about somebody named Winfred Williams, who was an orphan back in 1922, but it was part of that New York that group that you were talking about. And it was basically saying like soon in the article, Winfred's basically saying like soon after birth, there was a train that showed up and there was 13 children from that orphanage that were all taken. So not all of them went, only a select group. They were some of them were like wealthy. They came from wealthy families. Like they looked really clean. Like they didn't look like they had been through a disaster or anything, which I thought was very intriguing. I mean, they were grabbing anybody's children, it sounded like. But
I
at
don't
the
know,
same time,
that
but
is
at the same
terrifying.
yeah. But at the same time, like the Cabbage Patch. So the world wars were going I mean, the world fairs were going on at the same time. So you had these Cabbage Patch Kids that were supposedly being grown in a lab. So they had this joke saying that they could grow a baby in a week at these world fairs, right? And so they would sell these babies. So you have that going on at the same time you've got the trains dropping off the kids and repopulating. But at the same time you have these world fairs, it doesn't have anything to do with the orphan trains, but it's interesting. At those world fairs, they would slowly start to bring out pornography. They would have women walking around with just topless and making it like the new norm, trying to show that like this is normal. This is okay to look at porn. It's not going to hurt your marriage. It's not going to affect you at all. So they started introducing that as well, which I thought was kind of creepy, wondering when the hell that did start. But they were all, these world fairs were in these beautiful buildings that either the government has taken over or they either destroyed shortly after those world fairs events would happen.
Yeah, we need to do our next episode on the world fairs because,
That's true.
Next week, we'll talk about the World Fairs, but at Biltmore, we did the King Tut exhibit,
Yeah.
again with my nephew, and it's so crazy how these rich elites were, like, really invested in Egyptology and, like, what was going on over there, and then that ties into the World Fairs because at the Chicago World Fair, they literally had an exhibit to ancient Egypt, and they displayed, like, 50 prominent mummies, and they had all of these different things going on, and it ties into them saying that, like, maybe, ancient Egypt is actually in America. Like, there's all this crazy stuff. So next week, we'll talk about the World's Fair, but we have one more topic that we wanna talk about tonight, and that is the re-education aspect of it all, and how maybe one day, like, we could easily be thrown into, like, re-education camps if there was, like, a civil war and, like, the other side won, and then they decided that they wanted to re-educate all of us on, like, whoever is on the losing side. Like, I mean, like, they could easily, if they got, like, certain people got their way, throw conservative-minded people into, like, re-education camps because
Yeah.
people be batshit crazy, and so it goes into history. What have you found out?
So I read that there, at the same time all this was going on with the orphan trains, there were several groups of Germans that came over, and a lot of them would come over with money, which I'm thinking they may have been part of the Freemason, possibly, but they were backed by money and power. So different people were moving in from Germany and they were basically starting kindergarten. So this is when the word kindergarten kind of came about. And in the mid 1800s, so you had Germany doing the same thing that we were doing, right? You're re-educating these kids. And they thought that it would be okay to start having children wake up early in the morning, sit and be more structured throughout the day, learn necessary things. And that's when the school that we know today, which is almost like a prison, if you look at half of them, the windows are small. Mean, they're usually in these big brick buildings or cement buildings. You know, you're only allowed to talk during lunch or recess
No,
in
they can't
some
talk
schools.
during lunch.
So tell me about your nephew, what we just learned.
Yeah, no. So my nephew is now being homeschooled. Props to his parents for pulling them out. But, first off, I think that the modern school system was not built for little boys. I think like girls can tolerate it better because we're better. We don't need as much like wow,
Yeah, that's as
like,
much
in
energy.
our day. So but when I went to have lunch with my dad for his birthday at Deacon School, the kids, hundred of kids sitting in the cafeteria eating lunch in silence, listening to classical music. So then I was like, "So you're telling me the only time that they get like free interaction is 30 minutes at recess in a 7.5 hour day?" That is bananas. No wonder kids are having anxiety and panic attacks and can't handle life because the modern school system is built to make you a robot. It's not built for you. If you question things, it's like, it is not made for you. But they will like pull you out and put you in these gifted and talented classes, which they had already pulled Deacon for. I got pulled for them in elementary school where we would like sit around and do like all these mind puzzles and like see if we could figure out Morse code and like figure out who the robber was and like can you read minds and things like that. It was like weird worksheets. So it was like they were almost trying to figure out who were the ones that didn't fit the mold.
Right. Or who were going to fight who were
Yeah,
going to
fight
fight
yeah, fight
the
it.
box that they want to put you in. Yeah, it's just crazy. I mean, it's getting worse. I mean, but with going back to how this was going on, we talk about how we founded buildings. So a lot of these Germans that came over found a couple buildings and churches, a lot of these old Tartarian type style buildings. That's where they started the orphanages, the churches that would house these orphans, and also the new schools that were starting. So those are the buildings that they kind of took over because, like you and I know, they were already there. And they probably were beautiful and they probably had healing powers in them as well, some of them. But I thought that was kind of interesting. And then when I started watching like the history of those buildings, A lot of them ended up catching on fire after not being used after so many years, just like the asylums also, the same thing's going on. So they're definitely trying to hide, the past, which makes me think they're trying to get ready for another reset and then probably in our lifetime, they
Yeah.
may try.
Yeah, I'm kind of worried about they're gonna do another reset because I watched this video of this guy like 20 years ago where he was like, things are gonna start getting really weird and people are gonna have no choice but to question the weirdness and question things like so many of us are doing now, where we're just like, I've always been a questioner, but like even every regular conversation I have with people leads to some crazy obscure topic, and I'm always like, but it's like too many people are catching on to it. I always wonder this. It's like, if we sit here and we talk about all this and we out them, what's going to happen? Is it going to change for the good, or are they just going to get fed up with all of us and reset us again?
Very good question. Very good question. I know. I almost wonder like how many people were waking up back then to try and push back because it does take a lot of us on the same page in order to do anything. But I mean, if you look at like overseas, which I know our media tries to hide it, but if you're able to see what's going on in all the other countries, they're all fighting their government right now. They're all like protesting their government. And I don't really see us doing that.
Did you see where the Gen Z in Nepal like overthrew their government and like burned down their government building? Their freaking royal family or whatever were like dangling from the helicopter, being like evacuated from the palace. Did you see that?
I didn't see that part. I need to go
Yeah,
back
but
and
they
look at
overthrew
that.
their government in 24 hours. So it's like,
I love it.
can be done.
It can be done. You just have to have enough people.
Yeah, and we're too busy all fighting over here. Left and
Yeah.
right, Christian versus Muslim versus Jew. It's like color of your skin. Are you a guy? Are you a girl? Are you gay?
Oh,
Are you
yeah.
straight? It's like you got to like pick a side to everything. And I'm like, why can't we just be good people?
Now we have group 7 and group now remember you and I watched The Simpsons to see if there was a group 7, and sure as shit, they have their circle 7, and what they say that eventually we're gonna start to do is we're all gonna start to go against each other and say that, "Oh, no, like, we're part of this group, you're not part of our group." And I mean, it makes sense, like, when they laid it out.
But like, so the group 7 thing is like funny, but it could like really take off like that. A real life example is, are you vaccinated or are you not? And how that
Yeah.
literally tore families apart. And I'm like, what is happening over here? It's like, or the mask. If you have a mask on, you're like a savior to people. Like, you are a good person. You wore your mask. It's like the psychological warfare. It's like whatever
Yeah.
like whatever the people on the TV tell these people, they just do. And you're just like, wait, what? Last week you had a completely different opinion. That is where the woke left, I say, I will never get on board with, because they're the party of contradictions. They talk in circles, the circular logic, they never have a reason for something. They're like, but we're all kind of walking contradictions, aren't we? At the end of the day.
No, I think a lot of us just don't really know because we've been lied to for so long, we just don't know.
Yeah. I
And
just think
that's even in the Bible that
the
you just
extremes on
don't.
either side are crazy because you don't know.
Yeah. But and both those sides are on the same team. I mean, it's sad how many elections did we all spend all this money on and like they already picked whoever our president was gonna be for at least my entire lifetime.
Yeah. It's like it's a club and we ain't in it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we had to even go get the Amish to help us out because, like, it was just getting ridiculous.
It's crazy. The Amish seem to like maybe have the right idea about like
Dude,
simplicity of
we
life.
need to get somebody that is Amish on here because you are 100% right. This whole time, they made us think that they are weird, they're losers, but they were the smart ones. They were like, fuck the government. I'm going to live off the grid. I can live without the government and do everything on my own. And we can have our own school system. We can have our own health I'm sure they use a lot of herbal holistic medicine. You know, they grow their own food so they don't have all the chemicals inside of them like we do. They aren't vaccinated, I don't believe. I need to look up and see, but I don't think they believe in the vaccinations. And their kids don't go to the public schools, so they're not forced to. It's
Yeah.
just like my cat can't go get a freaking haircut because I didn't give her the rabies shot. Because in South Carolina, you have to get the rabies shot. Well, there's studies out there that the rabies shots don't have a certain number or a certain dose for cats and versus dogs. And sometimes they could get overdose and they could have health issues. And so I'm just like, well, but it's the same thing. Like you
You can't
can't
do
go to
anything.
public school if you don't have those shots. It's like, well, but yeah, I think the Amish have got it going on.
I know, and then that reminds me of the show that was, like, part of the Yellowstone series. I think it was 1883 where they were, like, making their trek out west, and there's a scene where, they go into town, one of the sons or maybe the nephew and the head of the matriarch of the family, they go into town and they're
Yeah.
talking to this guy and they say, "Oh, man, what's that?" He said, "This is a washing machine where you wash your clothes." And he was like, "Well, why would we ever need a washing machine to wash our clothes?" And he's like, "So you have more time." And he's like, "Yeah, but how do I get the washing machine?" He said, "Well, we rent it to you." And then he said, "Well, how do you run the washing machine?" "Well, we rent you power that you bring into your house." And he's like, "So what you're telling me is I got to work more hours to buy
Yeah.
more things to save more time." And he's like, "Well, it doesn't sound to me like I'm going to be saving more time because I'm going to be working all the." He said, "I'm gonna be saving time, but I'm gonna be spending all that time I'm saving working so I can pay for the things that are supposed to be saving me time."
100. Really quick, since you brought that up, I saw today that Zelensky purchased that farm or that ranch.
What rant?
Apparently, it's gigantic. And I'm
What
like,
rant?
wait a minute. Did all the money that we just give him, is he just turning around and using that? And now he's like one of the 10 largest landowners now with Bill Gates.
In the
Zelensky,
US?
yes, I saw that today.
What ranch?
Oh,
You have to fill it in.
that Yellowstone, what is it called? I don't watch Yellowstone, so I didn't know anything about it, but apparently the Yellowstone ranch he purchased, and they said it's twice the size of New York City.
Okay, yeah, so all of our tax money just went to Zelensky to buy a ranch. Congratulations, Zelensky. I hope you
Congratulations.
enjoy the American dream, you piece of shit. We talked a
But
lot today about the time around the World's Fair and how things could tie into the World's Fair. So I think it would be fun next week to do an episode where we kind of dive into the World's Fair, so 1883, and we'll see where that leads us. But thank you for tuning in today. Bless your heart. Keep questioning everything, and we'll see you next time.
keep spilling the tea with somebody else. See you next time.